Welcome to our third presentation in our summer EAL celebration. This is Rachel with the Path International Education Department. We have thoroughly enjoyed welcoming each of you and our talented presenters to share new approaches in equine-assisted learning and the potential impact each can have across populations. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Cheryl Meola, PhD, a licensed professional counselor in Greenville, North Carolina. She works at Rocking Horse Ranch, premier accredited center, and has a private psychotherapy practice, Main Source Counseling. She offers equine-assisted supervision for counselors as well as wellness workshops for helping professionals. As a Path International certified instructor and equine specialist in mental health and learning, her research focuses on developing equine-assisted learning workshops for master's counseling programs to enhance counseling skills development. Just some housekeeping as we get started. Your line will remain muted for the duration of the presentation. If you would like to download a PDF copy of the slides, please access them through your GoToWebinar toolbar. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box. Dr. Meola would be happy to help at the conclusion. And with that, welcome, Dr. Meola. We are so grateful to have you with us today.
Hi, I'm very grateful to be here too and to talk about something that I'm really passionate about spreading information on and getting more people excited about, which is equine-assisted learning activities for helping professionals. So during my PhD program, I had initially entered thinking I was going to focus my dissertation research on veterans and utilizing programs with horses to help them in transition. And I did do my research on that originally. And then I started to realize how helpful the process was to the counselors and other helping professionals involved, and realized that there was very limited research on this. And so I did my research on how equine-assisted learning and supervision could enhance master's counselor students' development of counseling skills. And I found a lot of really great statistically significant data, as well as a lot of qualitative feedback that people were using some of the self-awareness and coping skills they had seen themselves using in the intervention, like up to 6 months after the intervention. And so all of this kind of spurred me to do more research and to start utilizing EAL services with my supervisees and in wellness workshops. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got there through the research piece, and then I'm also going to talk about how we can work together to come up with some ideas that other programs might be able to utilize the same kind of programs. I do work in a private practice. I see about 20 to 30 clients a week. About 4 to 10 of them currently are doing equine facilitated psychotherapy. And I also have supervisees that I see in the office, and then we do sessions out at the farm. And I am currently still continuing my research with the counseling students at East Carolina University. So this workshop in particular has been designed with a few interactive components, and we may have to talk about them more at the end just because muting and unmuting might be difficult. But if you have a pencil or paper that you can jot down some ideas while we're going through, that would be great. And I think that we could all learn from each other. But I'm hoping that we develop more awareness as well as some knowledge base behind what we're looking at, and then some skills to make some community-based EAL services for helping professionals. So we're going to review some common wellness issues that helping professionals and health professionals have. We're going to discuss how the interventions, the EAL interventions, can address them. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about some interventions that I have experience with, or that I've had others give me feedback on that work well with this. And we're going to actually go through an example and try to structure a program. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies for success in structuring the community-based component of starting an EAL outreach program for helping professionals. I am going to try to leave some time at the end for questions. So if you have some, again, jot them down and hopefully I can address them. And I'll also provide my email at the end of the seminar in case you have more questions we don't get to. So wellness and helping professionals. Now, when I say helping professional, and a few times I say healthcare professional, I try to catch myself because it's so much more than that, but this is the way it's defined. And it's basically anyone who is at risk of burnout from caring for others. I think some of the things listed here are nursing, psychotherapy, psychological counseling, ministry. I think stay-at-home moms can qualify as helping professionals in a lot of ways. So it's really very broad, and I put this definition up there. This is what I use when I'm talking about it in research, but my own personal one is anyone at risk of burnout from caring for others. So many helping professionals experience burnout. We've all heard burnout. I think some of us might have experienced ourselves at times. Empathy fatigue, also called compassion fatigue, is another thing that is caused when helping professionals are not taking care of themselves properly and making sure that they're giving themselves their own time to process everything that they're going through, dealing with clients, students, patients, children, etc. And also, in a lot of cases, we experience secondary trauma. And so we are traumatized by the things that we are hearing and the things that our clients and patients are experiencing. So all of these things can cause decreases in our stress resiliency, our self-awareness, our self-esteem, and then in a little more externally in our employability and our work production, because as our awareness and esteem and resilience decrease, so does our work production. And it also decreases our leadership skills, and sometimes it's just from pure exhaustion. Why does all this happen? I think that helping professionals are usually the type of individuals who make all sorts of excuses. They have the "I'll sleep when I'm dead" mentality. And what I see is that some of our most caring, nurturing, and interpersonally gifted people are burning out before they've reached their natural max. We're going to look after this at a model of wellness to kind of help break down what wellness means, what we're referring to when we say wellness. And we're going to break it into categories so that we can then decipher how are people doing with wellness and self-care? What are they lacking? And then most importantly, how can we help them with horses? So this is the model that I use to kind of conceptualize wellness, I guess. It's kind of a vague notion. So wellness can be defined as the state of being in good health, especially as an actively pursued goal. This is the individual self model of wellness, and it's based on master's counseling students because that's where most of my research is based, but I think that it's very applicable to any helping profession. Why do we need to look at a model? First of all, I use it for grant writing purposes to talk about what we're doing in a structured way. It can be really great for workshops for CEUs to have a little bit more structure on what you're going over. And it gives all of us a better holistic understanding of what we're facing and addressing when we're working with helping professionals. So this model is derived originally from the Wheel of Wellness, which was based on Adlerian theory, if any of you are counselors and interested in the history of it. And it's broken down into 5 sections. So physical self, that includes things like exercise and nutrition. The creative self, which involves thinking. That's where our emotions and our emotional regulation and giving ourselves downtime comes in. Self-control, work, and positive humor. The coping self is things like leisure activities, stress management, feelings of self-worth, and realistic expectations and beliefs for ourselves. The social self has to do with friendship and love, connection, and the essential self has to do with spirituality and or religion, gender identity, cultural identity, and then self-care in general. So if we have a lack in any combination of these areas, this can contribute to what we were just talking about on the other side, which is burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary trauma. And figuring out where people are most lacking in different groups, such as master's counseling students, nursing students, physicians, addictions counselors, stay-at-home moms. This would help us develop an intervention that meets their needs. Currently, I'm actually working on a questionnaire that I'm developing using this model to ask people before they come to my workshops where they're struggling the most. But I would have shared it with you, and I will when it's done, but it's not quite there. So here are some common barriers to wellness that came up when I was doing research on this, and we're going to look at these in order to come up with some strategies to overcome them. I'm not going to bore you and read them all to you, but they're here, and you have a copy of this to look at and think about which one of these you think might affect the people you work with the most, and kind of think if any of these look familiar to you personally, if any of them cause a reaction as you read them of an aha or something that might really be a barrier to your own wellness or people that you work with or know. And again, these are based on master's counseling students, but the cool thing about that population is they tend to be of a wide age range, and I don't have it directly in front of me. I believe it's somewhere between like the ages of 23 and 40 something. And so it's a little bit, it's not exactly like the same age range that you would expect for students. So it gives us kind of like a wide spectrum of what other people might be dealing with. Okay, so how does EAL come into place and address the barriers to wellness? And I assume that a lot of people listening know what equine-assisted learning is, but I'm going to talk about it just for a brief minute for those of us who don't. Equine-assisted learning, I have right here the definition right off the PATH website, which is an experiential learning approach that promotes the development of life skills for educational, professional, and personal goals through equine-assisted activities. And there is a link in here. I hope that it's available for you on the handouts, but if not, it's just the EAL PATH International Resources for all equine-assisted learning activities. And there's a lot of really great stuff on there. If you're thinking about adding EAL into your program for the first time, I highly recommend going through all that and making sure you're very clear on what EAL is versus other equine-assisted activities and therapies. So we're going to talk a little bit about horses and wellness. There's so many different ways that horses help wellness, as many of us know, but I would like to really focus on 3 of the areas that come up most with helping professionals. So those are social connectedness, self-efficacy, and a safe space. And we'll talk a little bit about the physical benefits as well, because when you get into healthcare professionals, they really like to hear more about the physical benefits, and they really could help all of us as well. But I think it's a good selling point. We're going to talk a little bit about types of interventions that might or might not be appropriate. And then we're going to go through the example of structuring a sample EAL program. Yay, horse pictures. So horses and wellness. So the 3 points that we're going to focus on right now are the physical benefits, and I'm only going to go in brief details. I'm not a medical doctor, but these are just things that have come up in my research where, again, helping professionals could really use some help. And then we'll talk about the social connectedness aspect, which is brutally important to self-care. And we'll talk a little bit about self-efficacy. So when you think about, let's say like an ER or a trauma doctor, or maybe a labor and delivery nurse who always has too many patients and not enough time and help, and how much their body is in a constant state of adrenaline release or fight flight, they are constantly just pouring adrenaline in their bodies and living in a state of stress. Being around horses gives their bodies the chance to repair the damage from stress, and also even the secondary trauma through the somatic experiencing, which means like the bodily awareness and the bodily experiencing of being around horses. That contact, the physical contact, releases a lot of positive hormones that can help us with stress regulation. We're more consciously aware of tightness and stress in our body when we're around horses because they're so responsive to it. And again, we'll talk a little bit about some interventions that specifically address this and really help people with this awareness. So it restores body self-regulation, as anybody who works with trauma survivors knows. This is really, really important in healing of trauma. And so it's very, very important when you're healing through secondary trauma and also compassion fatigue. It positively influences respiratory rates and heart rates. This has been shown in research, and again, this lowers our stress and it helps us with stress resiliency. And then also, I think a physical benefit is just the grounding, and we live in a world where we are always in our head. We're worried about, time, and we're worried about money, and we're worried about what other people think of us, and we're worried about all the what if scenarios. And so being physically present with the horses can help ground us and stay present focused. And imagine how important that is for that ER doctor who's running around from patient to patient, and that nurse who's doesn't have enough help in her labor and delivery unit, and the mom with the 6 kids at home for all day long every day. It's just a little break to be present and grounded. So many therapists, and I know other helping professionals as well, are really solo, and they don't get a lot of peer-to-peer interaction, except when they're lucky and they work places that there are other therapists and they have free time. But a lot of what we do is fee for service, and so downtime is time you don't get paid for, and that can be difficult. And a lot of helping professionals work in similar situations, or it may not be the money aspect, but it might be that management is always after you to be doing something. And I know with a lot of nurses that I work with, there's never enough help for them, and there's always more things to do than what they have time for. And so the time to actually connect is just not there. I work with a lot of teachers who say that, connecting with other teachers can actually cause more stress and drama than just staying, in your room when you have a break. And a lot of times, parents who stay home with their kids are just too tired to connect with other adults. They're mentally and physically exhausted. So horses help reduce isolation, and they increase feelings of positive social connectedness. They remind us why it's important. So we all know it's important, but when we're with them, we remember, we feel it physically, and we experience it. Horses, we know this, they rely on their herd for survival. They rely on others for socialization and protection. And this is similar to positive coworker and peer scenarios that we hope to have at work. And the more we're reminded of how important it is to our interaction with horses, the more we can try to seek that out and be aware of what feels good and what doesn't when you interact with people at work and outside of work. Because sometimes it's just the exhaustion and you don't even want to interact with people you're friends with or your partner or your kids. Horses really emphasize the importance of self-care. They realize that they need to rely on each other to take care of themselves, and also that meeting their needs makes them most able to fulfill, their integral role in the herd. And so if you or the helping professionals you're working with take the time to take care of themselves, much like the horses do when they're interacting, they're going to bring their best self forward to every aspect of their life. And that's really what we're hoping for. And that's what increases their feelings of self-worth and their self-awareness and their capacity to do their jobs to the fullest. And the more that we make people aware of this and explain it in a way that makes sense, the more impactful our services will be, and the more people will be interested in getting involved. And you can see here that our horses at the farm are very good at social connectedness and self-care. So the other big piece is self-efficacy. It is defined as the belief in oneself to perform skills with positive outcomes. This was one of the measures I used in my research, and so I might nerd out a little on self-efficacy, but it's just super important to everything. It's important to kids. It's important to all people, and it's just your belief in yourself to be able to do something successfully. And when you are experiencing burnout, fatigue, trauma, decreased stress resilience, your self-efficacy becomes depleted as well. And so being around horses can increase your professional self-efficacy in your service to others. I'll give an example. Like one of the things I like to do with my clients is progressive relaxation work with the horses. We might use a little Reiki, or we might use Masterson method, or we might use grooming. And we talk about their body and their awareness of their body and tension they hold, And as they relax it and they're working on the horse, we can see the signs of the horse relaxing. And this helps remind them about how important it is, their own body language and body awareness and what they're bringing to the table in terms of energy to promote that engagement and relaxation and help others. And horses aren't going to hide how they feel about it like some people might. And so there's immediate feedback, and that in itself is a mastery experience. And the number one way to increase self-efficacy is through having mastery experiences of the skill that you're trying to accomplish. So as you increase self-efficacy, you increase positive outcomes at work. This is what research shows us. And the positive outcomes that helping professionals have are in making other people happier and healthier. And, you know, what's more important than that? And so as they feel and they see more positive outcomes in their clients and students and children, they have less burnout and they experience less compassion fatigue because things are going well and they can feel that what they're doing is making a difference. And, you know, being with the horses is that first step in developing a successful working partnership, and, you know, where the horse and the human are working together towards communicating with each other and accomplishing tasks together. So that's what I mean when I refer to it as a mastery experience. It's the primary way that people are learning that they can do something well, and that something is helping others. So what are the other benefits of being able to increase their self-efficacy while being around horses? It's all the things that go back to the beginning. We're going to increase self-esteem. We're going to increase employability, work production. We're going to enhance their management skills and leadership skills. And these are all the things that were decreased by burnout and fatigue and secondary trauma. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about types of interventions, how to choose appropriate interventions, and these are equine-assisted learning interventions, obviously. We'll talk a little bit about program restrictions. So do you want to offer one-on-one workshops for people in terms of helping professionals? Do you want to offer group workshops? We'll go over how both of those look a little bit later. But some things to keep in mind are program restrictions. How many horses do you have available for extra programs like that? What kind of horses do you have available and what can they do? What's your staff availability? You know, if you offer these, most often I offer them on weekends, and you know, we have to make sure you have staff that are willing to do this on weekends. You have to look at confidentiality. Is there a lot of foot traffic? Are these helping professionals referring people to your program, and do they want to be there when there are students, clients, patients there? And also the cost, you know, how much are you going to have to put out and how much can you charge, and is it worth it for your program, or can you get grants that support it? And you also have to look at goals and experiences of the group or the individual you're working with before you can choose an appropriate intervention. So a self-care goal can look very different for different groups, and as we go through the example, we'll talk a little bit about choosing appropriate horse interventions for the experience and goal needed. But, you know, some of the different groups I've worked with, I've done some general workshops. I've started working on one for a collegiate recovery addictions program, nursing students, counseling students. I mean, there's so many different groups that you could be looking at, and their goals could be very different, or they could be the same. For a self-care workshop, you might not want to do too many horse interventions that overwhelm non-horse people with a challenging experience. So maybe doing a team building corporate workshop, you may want to do obstacle courses together as a group, or leading if they're working on leadership or management skills. But it might be too much if what you're hoping to accomplish is relaxation, connection, and you're not as interested in like the leadership part or the assertiveness part. But, you know, people might want to work on leadership and boundaries as part of self-care, and leading is completely appropriate. So it's really important to know your audience and what they want, which is why I'm trying to develop that questionnaire. So just a little bit on trying to set it up as an individual intervention versus a group. These are some of the ways I've set it up and plan to set them up. And so there are probably a million other ways. So these are just examples. And again, keeping your program restrictions in mind. How many people can you have at once financially, time-wise, horse and staff-wise, and also human traffic-wise, as in how many people are going in and out of your program every day. Some workplaces are actually spending money to make sure employees are developing self-care strategies as they're recognizing burnout, fatigue, trauma are issues for the employers as well as the employees. And that's where some of these workshops and the wellness workshops and professional development have come into play. And I see this probably booming in the next 2 to 5 years, just from what I've seen through research and the kind of feedback I've gotten from local professions. And here in Greenville is an absolutely wonderful place to start this kind of thing because we are a university community and we're also a medical school community. And so there are so many burnt out helping professionals here. And I'm sure there are many other places too, but because of the sheer number here, I'm hoping to get some research done on this and get some numbers out there to prove that, these interventions are impacting and enhancing, the development of life skill care, self-care and life skills and helping professionals. Okay, so goals. Goals are, increase self-care, decrease stress resiliency, some of the broad stuff, decrease secondary trauma and compassion fatigue and burnout that we've been talking about. And then what I've also been mentioning, and here's an example, are what kind of experiences do you want these people to have at your farm? So these are just some examples, and there are a lot. So I'm going to kind of pick one of these and try to relate it to a goal. For one of my research participants coming to the farm, I want them to have an experience where they are in a place where their performance anxiety is triggered, because what I'm measuring is, are they learning what natural coping skills they have to deal with performance anxiety? And so I want to put them in a situation, and the bottom one listed here is coping skills for anxiety, where they are a little triggered. And then what happens is they overcome it and they realize, wow, when I see a client in real life and I get triggered and I'm nervous, I have these great coping skills and I can still connect. So that's the experience that I want them to have. And that has nothing to do with the intervention yet. That's the next step. So this is just a list of ideas to get you started. And I'm sure that you could do some investigating and figuring things out and come up with even more. And hopefully we can all share them together as this grows, hopefully. Okay, so I got fancy with my animation there. Here are some intervention ideas. I've tried all of these at different points for different things. And again, I'm sure there's a million more, but I'll go through these very briefly, some of them. One of the ones that people sometimes ask me is the being and not doing portion. That can be integral for helping professionals who are always on the go, always rush to write notes, do charts, check in with management and make phone calls. And it's just absolutely doing nothing but being with the horse and enjoying being. And so when we're developing these, sometimes we might think, oh, well, people are going to expect to do more. But kind of the whole point of this is to get people to not always be doing so much. And so that one is one that I use a lot when I work with supervisees and when I have people come out to the farm. Non-judgmental observation, I use that a lot in the herd observation, and I learned this a long time ago in a workshop I went to, but what we do is we jot down notes after the herd observation, and then we make 2 lists, and we make a list of observations and interpretations. But I don't tell anyone what we're doing at first, and we try to figure it out and then talk about perception and how much perception is important in being able to handle, what we're dealing with every day, and how integral it is to taking care of ourselves. So that's another one that I use a lot in my workshops. So as you go through them, just kind of ask yourself, how does each one of these teach self-care? Try to structure a workshop to incorporate what will work for you as the facilitator, what will work for your horses, and what then will work for the participants. You know, if you look at some of these, what might a nurse or a nursing student be going through or dealing with as a wellness barrier that mindful leading could help them become aware of or work through? And, you know, what might teachers coming out to the farm together as a group be able to learn through doing some body work with the horse and progressive relaxation that they could then use to take care of themselves when they're dealing with students and each other and all that during the school year? Parents. Okay, so we're going to work through an example together. So even though we're all in different places, we are working on building connection, which is very important in self-care. And honestly, online forums is just something that pops up everywhere now. I know some nurses who go to, you know, do most of their classes online, and they're not interacting with peers on a day-to-day basis, face-to-face. Same thing with master's counseling programs. So this is a challenge that people are facing more and more, is how do you connect when you're not with people? You know, CEUs even. I mean, I think you could do most of them online nowadays. So I think that one day I'd like to offer these as CEUs for counselors and maybe other professions. That's what I'm working on now as well. So, you know, there's a chance to work on connection and self-care for yourself, and hopefully, you know, realize some things and maybe be able to use some of these interventions with their own clients, students, patients, and pass it on. Okay, so let's work on this together a little bit. And like I said, we found that it might be hard to have people mute and unmute, so we're just going to maybe jot down some ideas, and then at the end, hopefully have a chance to share some and ask questions. So this is an example wellness intervention opportunity. So the Department of Counseling at a local university wants to send out 6 faculty members to participate in an EAL wellness workshop at your program. Their goal is to produce higher quality, more positive interactions between faculty and students in fieldwork training. And a common problem they're experiencing is that students don't feel safe discussing difficulties in the fieldwork with faculty, since faculty determine their grades in the fieldwork course. And, you know, if people are not discussing difficulties, then they're not growing through their weaknesses and learning their coping skills and ways to overcome them. So we're going to go through a little example of choosing interventions based on wellness experiences needed. And again, if you can write down some ideas so that we can share them later, I think that we are all really good at this. We just need an idea of how to present it in a way that we're actually addressing the barriers needed. Okay, so some ideas for overarching goals for this group are experiences that will increase ability to give feedback in a non-judgmental way. Gee, I wonder how horses can do that. Understand how faculty presence and body language contribute to the supervisory relationship with students. Understand leadership and assertive yet non-aggressive communication. And understand the importance of intent, congruency, and being present on relationships, including the Supervisory Working Alliance. So as we're sitting here for a minute, just if you could take 30 seconds or so and jot down some ideas for the experiences that you would like this group to have. And remember, this isn't the interventions, these are the experiences you'd like. So I think that I have them listed again here, so you don't have to flip through and look at them. Okay, so some of the goals were learning to be non-judgmental in feedback. And I think that most of these experiences can contribute that in some ways. Leading and mindful leading comes to mind as being a very positive, oh shoot, I jumped to interventions. Sorry, it's because I'm looking at the next slide. So looking at some of these, the reason I didn't like necessarily pick any for you is because really all of these experiences could be successful for this group. Now, there are some that might be a little bit harder to justify than others, such as maybe coping skills for anxiety, unless you're working with new faculty and that's something they're experiencing. But we didn't get that information, so we'd need more from them and what their personal barriers are. But awareness of communication habits may be very helpful. Boundary setting, trusting connection, learning to be in their body and be aware of what's going on in the moment. A positive self-outlook could really help in helping their supervisees also have a positive self-outlook. And awareness of others is probably a big one as well. But as you can see, you know, there are a lot of different experiences that can address those goals, but what you need to be able to do is communicate what experiences they need. Okay, so what are some ideas for interventions that address experiences and goals? Grooming for connection is what is pictured here, and that's what I call grooming, because I don't want people to think that they're just cleaning the horses. We talk about nonverbals and how to tell when a horse is relaxed. We go through all the body language, and we have them decide which brush. We'll use a few the horse seems to enjoy the most, and we'll just have them stick with that. And then we talk about their own body and how their body feels through the experience. And then we talk about how they can, what would work for them to remind themselves of that throughout the next day at work. And I had one client say, well, I'm going to bring my hairbrush with me. I'm going to leave it right on my desk because I'm going to remember how much Sammy enjoyed having his mane brushed with a hairbrush. And so little things like that kind of help them tie it over into the workplace as well. Being and not doing can really relate here, because a lot of times in supervision, like if you are, or in management, even if you're driving too much, people don't get a chance to sort of stop and think about what's going well and what's not going well. So any experience of just being with the horse, like either individually or in groups. Mindful leading and working on that balance that horses need. Like first they need to establish if you're safe or not, much like a supervisee and a supervisor, right? And that's one of the goals that they have, is to establish safety. And so talking about how horses decide if you're safe or not, and how to know what they've decided through body language. And then working on leading and, you know, letting the horses give them feedback on their assertiveness level and their aggression and kind of their leadership style, you know, rather than human telling them what they're doing wrong or what they're doing right. People are going to obviously be a lot more respectful and have an increased understanding and self-awareness through the horse's feedback. So there's a lot of different interventions that will work here, and I'd love to hear some of your feedback as well for ideas of how you could structure this. So the point isn't to make a workshop for you, but to get you thinking about how to create a workshop and what your horse's skills and assets and experiences are that would work for you. There's a few other little things I wanted to go over. One is marketing considerations. You are not, what are you selling? Okay, you are not selling your services and you're not selling your credentials. What you're selling is a solution to how people feel. So ask people how they feel. Tell them how your EAL intervention with horses will make them feel better, and then tell them how. What are you calling your EAL intervention? And this was a big one for me. Here are some ideas of different ones that I've tried or am trying. I will show you an example of how I marketed mine and some of the feedback that I got on it, which is where I came up with the name Wellness Workshops. Mental fitness was one that I tried out. Wellness is one that you could use. Stress reduction, you know, that's really big, especially like the mindfulness-based stress reduction movement. And, you know, you guys might have other great ideas that I'd love to hear too. So here's an example marketing, like we were talking about. Ask them how they feel. Are you overwhelmed with stress from relationships, parenting, work, and other commitments? Could you use support with anxiety, depression, or dealing with life transitions? And they might be like, yes, I do. Read on, right? Rather than saying, I am a CBT certified therapist, or, you know, something along those lines that has to do with like credentials. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear about themselves. So what I write on my website is Main Source Counseling provides a safe and supportive setting for learning, growth, and change to occur. And then I talk about our approach to wellness. So then I get into what we offer them, but I don't talk about credentials. That's all on another page if they want to look at it, or it's scroll down. I can't remember exactly, but I talk about what they want to hear. What's it going to be like? What are the horses going to do? And so that's really important when you're trying to market this to people who might be paying for employees to go and things. These are what they need to hear in order to get buy-in for your programs to work. So here's an example of the first one I did. This was the first mental wellness workshop I had. As you look at it, you know, read through it for a minute and think about what works for you and what doesn't. We obviously did equine-assisted activities as a portion of the workshop this time. I had some feedback that people thought about signing up, but the word mental just didn't sit right with them, and they thought mental wellness, no, I don't need that. And so I've worked into wellness workshops and stress reduction, maybe stress resiliency. I still played around with using mental fitness. I kind of like that. Still figuring out what really makes most people tick and doesn't turn people away. And so that can be really important. A couple of legal and ethical considerations to think about as you're adding these into your programming are who not to market to. So clients of psychotherapy, if you're a therapist, or patients, if you're a doctor, because of ethical codes and boundaries, it would not be appropriate to offer these kind of services, at least in most states that I'm familiar with. And if you're part of ACA or anything like that with current clients, because it's not psychotherapy. So there is that boundary issue. And also be careful with using this for people who are good referral sources for you. You want them to have a really positive experience there, but you also don't want them to feel like their confidentiality is compensated in any way by going to this workshop where their referrals may be seeking services as well. So to really stress the importance of that and make sure that you let them know. Try to stay away from words like therapy, therapeutic. Well, therapeutic's not so bad, but therapy and mental, because then they might be confused with what kind of services you're offering. And make sure that you talk to them about the how. I mean, if there's no riding involved, make that very clear. Because a lot of people ask me that, oh, I'm going to go ride a horse and feel better. I'm like, well, actually, here's what happens, because we don't do any riding at all in our EAL. And actually, I work mostly with miniature horses, and that's why. But make sure people know like what the interventions may be like and what the physical restrictions might be, and also, you know, is it covered by insurance or is it covered by employers? Is it a continuing ed course? Can they get credit for it? And all those kind of things, because that's what people really want to know, and that's where people will give you their money and actually put money into their health and their self-care, is if they're understanding exactly what's going on, and they know it's going to help them in more than one way. And that's why I'm really pursuing the CEU idea. And if anyone has good information on that, you know, let's all share it together, because the more we can get buy-in, because it's so hard to get helping professionals to take time for themselves, that I think that if we can look at it in a way that offers them more than one thing at a time, it might be a way to get their buy-in and get them to come in and actually take care of themselves. Because really that's the hardest part, is getting them to say, yeah, I'm going to put money into me. So I hope that was helpful. That's about the best I could do in a limited time. If you are interested, I put in some references in here. There's not a lot. I have a lot more if you really are interested in that aspect of it, but it's here for your use. And here is my contact information if you are interested in asking questions that don't get addressed today. So that's basically it, and I don't know if it's easier, Rachel can maybe advise you to type questions into the chat, or ideas or anything like that, or if it's easier to have people talk.
Thank you, Dr. Meola. That was a really thoughtful presentation, and certainly all attendees, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the question box, and then we will share them with Dr. Meola for some feedback. I do have some. We start with, can these workshops be adapted to caregivers of loved ones with dementia, and what may be an appropriate intervention for that population?
Can I just talk?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. So caregivers for family members with dementia is tough. I have quite a few clients that are struggling with that, and I think that if you can find it, so the experience you want them to have is the importance of taking care of themselves and being and not doing. And I think also one thing that they struggle with is enjoying time with family members, whether it's the one with dementia or not, because everything becomes a process and constant reminders and routines. And so any sort of mindfulness intervention, I think, would be absolutely, something to incorporate, and maybe not the only intervention, but one way to go that, in my experience, is something that those caregivers really struggle with. But other people might have really good suggestions for that as well.
And Vanessa has a question on why you choose to mainly use miniature horses.
So for me, it started out as a scheduling reason because they were just not being used in therapeutic riding as much, and so they were more available to me. But one thing I've learned is it's so much easier for me to do what I'm doing. It's easier on my equine specialist when I have an equine specialist to manage the care because of the size. And I have found them to be not as desensitized to a lot of things that some of our horses through training are desensitized to through riding and groundwork and all that. Some of the bigger horses, especially in therapy programs, and I mean, horses are horses and they're going to respond naturally, but I've just found with the mini horses so much, it just happens a little faster sometimes.
And Dana has a question on what is the typical length of a program that you offer and what do you typically charge?
Okay, so the wellness workshops I run, I've only done a few so far in the group format, and I run them 9 to 1. And that seems to give us enough time. We do an hour and a half to 2 hours with the horses. We're incorporating herd observation now, and then a grooming or a mindful activity. And then we do some yoga and stress relief. And last time we added aromatherapy and bath salt making. So we tried to make it a little more of a holistic approach. And we did, like I said, it was about an hour and a half to 2 hours with the horses. When I bring supervisees out, we do about 45 minutes to 50 minutes with the horses, depending on what we're doing. But in my research, just the 30-minute interaction with the horses was enough to make a big difference.
That's great. And here's maybe a tough one. What do we do to help professionals that have perhaps experienced trauma, like first responders? Is that something that we can offer EAL with, or should we have a mental health professional on standby as well?
And that was for first responders?
Yes, first responders who have experienced trauma.
I mean, if you have the option to have a mental health professional available, I think that's great. I don't think you necessarily have to offer it as psychotherapy. You could do EAL, I believe, but you would need to be clear on that and let people know that what their resource is should they be triggered. That would also depend on your resources, and you'd have to pick interventions that you feel, if people are getting triggered, are easy to step back from. And be aware of your training, and if you don't feel comfortable working with that population, then don't do it, or find someone who is what I would say.
That's perfect advice. A question on your social connectedness. To promote social connectedness, could we have a community workshop where all different helping professionals come together, so not people from the same field necessarily?
I mean, I think that's great. And the first one that I ran was like that. And I thought there was nothing wrong with doing it that way. I think that the reason I've grouped it together a little more lately is because I've been approached by a group of nursing students and collegiate recovery and things like that, asking me to do it specifically for them. So I've delved a little further into that, and I found that there are some differences. But overall, I don't think there's anything wrong with just general workshops.
Great. And it really diversifies the opportunity for people to get their community involved in them. see, we have one from Michelle. What is a reasonable amount to charge for a 15-minute session? I would like to see how your thoughts compare with my current fees.
50 minute?
Yes, 50.
Okay, so I have to pay the barn and the equine specialist, so my prices might seem a little high. I don't have my own facility, but I do charge $75 for a 50-minute session for people that I am currently supervising or in that capacity. Although when I advertise it to the public, I do advertise it as $125 an hour. But as you can see, there is like a sliding scale sort of in place there for where people are in their finances. And I don't, so when I do the wellness workshops, that's a totally different population generally that's seeking that in some aspects. And a lot of times it's students. And I generally charge $50, and then I have a 10% off for students, $45 for the 9 to 1. But you know, it is difficult to charge high prices in a place like Greenville because of our typical population, I guess.
And I think we have time. If you want to type in your question, we will get to as many as possible. We have a follow-up to that from Nicole. She wants to know, do you ever have grants that can cover this for people?
I think that is definitely something that we should all pursue and look at. I think the only grant that I can think of is the local grant that we've pursued for this kind of thing. But I think one, you know, if it's coming from a department like a nursing department or a counseling department, there may be funds that cover this kind of like development or intervention. And that's one place that I think there might be some success in finding it. But I'm trying to start, and an idea I have is to start on my Facebook page grant resources. I just haven't found any that are a little bit more broader than Greenville yet.
Thank you. And let's see, Tiffany wants to know if you offer workshops for stay-at-home moms, do you ever have the kids come with them to learn as well, or just moms solo?
Yes, like that's actually something that I'm going to be starting this fall, and I'm lucky enough in that the place that I work now has a playground, and it has goats. It's actually like a whole working farm, and pigs and things like that, and so like pot-bellied cute pigs. And so there's a lot of stuff for kids to do while I work with the moms or dads. I mean, I'm not saying it's just moms or grandparents. And the woman who owns the farm is a retired special ed teacher and is qualified to do things with them. And she has preschools come and do days there. And so we're really lucky that we can provide that kind of programming. So yes, we do allow kids to come. They're just not part of the workshop.
All right. And I think that's all the questions that we have right now. Certainly, if you have any that come to mind, and once we're all done, feel free to email Cheryl, or you can always email us at pathintl@pathintl.org. And thank you, Dr. Meola, for sharing your knowledge to make a positive impact with helping professionals. And a big thank you
so much.
Yeah, a big thank you to our audience as well for taking time out of your day to learn more about wellness workshops and the diversity of EAL. We hope you have been inspired by this series and have plans to join us for another educational offering in the near future. And thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day. Do you have any final thoughts, Dr. Meola?
Nope, I hope to see all of you maybe in October at the international conference.
Great. We hope to see you too. Take care, everyone.